In the summer of 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old naval engineer from Nagasaki. He was nearing the end of a 3-month business trip in the city of Hiroshima. With his work finished, all his bags were packed. He was scheduled to return home on August 7th to his wife and infant son. He was just one day away from safety. The morning of August 6th, 1945, began with a sense of normalcy that was utterly deceptive. For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, it was to be his final day of a long business trip. He set off for the Mitsubishi shipyard with 2 colleagues, the sun already promising another hot and humid day. The city of Hiroshima was going about its business, a scene of routine activity amidst the weariness of a long war. As they walked, Yamaguchi suddenly realized he had forgotten his hanko, his personal seal, a necessary item for finalizing documents. This small, mundane frustration, a forgotten stamp, would prove to be a twist of fate with unimaginable consequences. He turned back to retrieve it, a decision that placed him in a specific, open location at a precise and terrible moment. Later that morning, as Yamaguchi was back on his way, an air raid siren wailed, causing a momentary ripple of alarm. But when a lone B-29 bomber was spotted high overhead, the all-clear was given. A single plane was off on a reconnaissance mission, not a full-scale bombing run, and the city relaxed its guard. It was a fatal misjudgment. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb bay of the Enola Gay opened. Yamaguchi later recalled seeing a small object falling, with what looked like a little parachute attached, the blast-measuring equipment deployed with the bomb. In that split second of curiosity, the world transformed. There was no traditional explosion to hear first. The initial phenomenon was purely visual. He described it not as a flash of lightning, but as a vast, all-consuming sheet of magnesium light, a great bluish-white flash that swallowed the entire sky. The light was an physical entity, a wall of pure energy that erased everything in its path. In the immediate silence that followed the flash, the physical force of the blast wave arrived. It tore across the landscape with the fury of a biblical wind, hurling Yamaguchi through the air and dumping him, stunned and broken, into a nearby potato field. The temporary blindness caused by the intense light left him in a world of darkness and roaring sound. When his sight slowly began to return, it was to a scene of absolute unreality. The world he had known minutes before was simply gone. The shipyard where he had been standing was obliterated. The city center was a rising column of unimaginable smoke and fire, a monstrous, roiling fungus that blotted out the sun. He was only 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, well within the zone of total annihilation. By any statistical measure, he should have been vaporized, reduced to a shadow on the ground. Yet, miraculously, he was alive. The aftermath was a descent into hell. The city was a landscape of smoldering ruins and raging fires. The air was thick with acrid smoke and the smell of burning. The cries of the injured and dying formed a horrifying chorus of agony. People wandered, ghost-like, their skin hanging in strips from their bodies, their faces swollen beyond recognition. Yamaguchi's own body was a map of his proximity to the blast. The left side of his torso, his face, and his arms were severely burned, the skin bubbling and blackening in the intense thermal radiation. The force of the explosion had ruptured his eardrums, muffling the sounds of the inferno around him. Driven by a primal instinct for survival, he managed to navigate the apocalyptic wreckage and find his 2 colleagues, who had also, against all odds, survived. The 3 men, shell-shocked and wounded, spent a terrifying night in a makeshift air raid shelter on the outskirts of the city, listening to the chaos outside. In the morning, his mind focused on a single desperate goal. He had to get home. He had to get back to Nagasaki. This drive to return to his family was the only thread of sanity left in a world that had gone utterly mad. The journey back to Nagasaki was a harrowing ordeal that tested the very limits of human endurance. Bleeding, burned, and in profound shock, Yamaguchi joined a river of other refugees fleeing the smoldering ruins of Hiroshima. The transportation infrastructure was in chaos, with train lines damaged and services completely disrupted. Somehow, through sheer determination, he managed to board a train heading west, crammed into a carriage filled with the wounded, the dying, and the utterly traumatized. The scene inside was a microcosm of the devastation outside, a silent or moaning mass of humanity, each person carrying their own private horror. As the train slowly chugged out of the city, the view from the window offered a panoramic nightmare, a vast, flat plain of ash and rubble, with only the occasional skeletal remains of a reinforced concrete building still standing. The absolute scale of the destruction was now undeniable. For miles there was nothing. The city had been erased. Each passing mile confirmed the unimaginable power of the single bomb he had witnessed, a sight that was now permanently seared into his memory alongside the physical burns on his skin. He finally arrived in Nagasaki on the afternoon of August 8th. A ghost returned to the world of the living. His relief at being home was immediately tempered by the shock his condition inflicted upon his family. His wife, Hisako, was horrified by the sight of him. His face and body were swollen and disfigured by severe burns. His clothes were tattered, and he moved with a slow, pained gait of a man who had stared into the abyss. He was a living omen of a new kind of warfare. His first stop was to a hospital, where his wounds were bandaged as best as possible, though the true nature of his radiation exposure was a mystery to the doctors themselves. The primary diagnosis was his visible trauma, the terrible burns in his burst eardrums. Finally, he was able to return to the relative safety of his own home, to the embrace of his wife and the innocent gaze of his infant son. He was safe. He had made it. He could begin the long and painful process of recuperation, sheltered by his family and the familiar surroundings of his own city. For a brief, fleeting moment, the nightmare of Hiroshima was something that could be relegated to the past, a story of survival to be told once his strength had returned. The following day, August 9th, despite his injuries and his wife's pleas for him to rest, Yamaguchi felt a duty to report to the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. He needed to explain his situation, to account for his abrupt return, and to deliver a first-hand account of what had happened. When he arrived, his appearance alone caused a stir. His supervisor and colleagues listened with a mixture of skepticism and disbelief as he described the terrifying event. He told them of the single B-29, the brilliant flash of light, the city-leveling wind, and the ensuing inferno. He insisted, with the desperate conviction of an eyewitness, that a single bomb, just one, had completely destroyed the city of Hiroshima. His account defied all conventional understanding of aerial bombardment. To his superiors, it sounded like the ravings of a man driven delirious by his injuries and trauma. They found it difficult to comprehend that a single weapon could possess such cataclysmic power. They were arguing with him, challenging his sanity, unable to accept the terrifying new reality he was describing, a reality that, at that very moment, was once again descending from the skies directly above them. The scene in the Nagasaki office on the morning of August 9th was one of tense frustration. There stood Yamaguchi, his body swathed in bandages, his face etched with pain, and the lingering shock of his experience, trying to convince his manager of the impossible. He recounted the details of Hiroshima with a desperate urgency, describing the singular, all-consuming power of the weapon. His account was met not with sympathy or belief, but with sheer incredulity. The notion that a single bomb could wipe a city from a map was beyond the scope of their understanding. It sounded like fantasy, the delusion of a man shattered by trauma. Yamaguchi insisted, his voice likely rising with a mix of anger and desperation. A single bomb destroyed Hiroshima. He was not just reporting an event. He was trying to warn them, to convey a terrifying new truth that had descended upon the world. But the truth was too monstrous to be accepted. As his boss challenged his story, the universe delivered a chilling, unequivocal reply. At precisely 11:02 a.m., the world outside the office windows vanished once more in a great, silent flash of white light. It was a horrifyingly familiar sensation, the same instantaneous bleaching of color from the environment, the same silent forerunner of doom. This time, there was no moment of confusion or curiosity. Yamaguchi's body reacted before his mind could fully process the event. He knew. He threw himself to the ground, shouting a warning that was both a scream and a statement of terrifying fact. It's another atomic bomb. The physics of the event were a brutal echo. The flash, then the deafening roar of the blast wave that shattered the windows and sent debris flying through the office. In a cruel twist of fate, that defies all statistical probability, he found himself once again at the same lethal distance, roughly 3 kilometers from the hypocenter of a second nuclear explosion. He had become a unique case in human history, a man caught at the epicenter of the nuclear age not once, but twice. In the aftermath of the second cataclysm, Yamaguchi's first and most frantic thought was for his family. Stumbling out of the damaged office, he fought his way through the fresh chaos of his own hometown, a city now mirroring the hellscape he had just escaped in Hiroshima. The fear that his wife and son had been taken from him by the very same force he had miraculously survived days before must have been unbearable. The relief he felt upon reaching his neighborhood was therefore profound and almost miraculous. His home, shielded from the direct thermal and blast effects by a natural ridge, was still standing. His wife, Hisako, and their young son were shaken but physically unharmed. They had survived the blast, spared the immediate physical devastation that had consumed so much of the city. Yet, this salvation was layered with a deep and cruel irony. Yamaguchi had endured a 3-day odyssey of suffering to return to the safety of his home and family, only to have the apocalypse follow him to his doorstep. He had carried the invisible scars of the first bomb back to Nagasaki, and now he and his family were subjected to a second dose of the insidious radiation that would sow the seeds of long-term illness. He had escaped one ground zero, only to find himself at another, making his homecoming not an end to his nightmare, but the beginning of a second, prolonged chapter of anguish. The immediate survival from the twin blast was only the beginning of a lifelong struggle. The physical aftermath was a protracted and painful ordeal for Yamaguchi and his family. The acute effects of radiation sickness soon took hold. High fevers, relentless nausea, and the unsettling loss of his hair. The severe burns he suffered in Hiroshima became festering, painful wounds that refused to heal properly for nearly a year, a constant physical reminder of the blast's fury. But the suffering was not his alone. His wife, Hisako, who was exposed to fallout in Nagasaki while searching for food in the devastated city, later developed radiation-induced illnesses, including liver and kidney cancer, from which he would eventually pass away. Their infant son, Katsutoshi, also suffered from poor health his entire life, ultimately dying of cancer in 2005, a tragedy the family attributed to the radiation exposure. The invisible poison of the bombs had seeped into the very fabric of their lives, creating a legacy of illness that would span generations. Beyond the physical agony lay a profound and complex psychological trauma. Yamaguchi carried the immense weight of survivors' guilt, a haunting question that had no answer. Why had he lived when so many others in both cities had perished in an instant? The memories of the hellish landscapes, the cries of the injured, and the sight of the dead were permanently etched into his mind, causing recurring nightmares and a deep-seated anxiety that never fully left him. There was also the pervasive fear of the unknown. In the years following the war, the long-term effects of radiation were poorly understood, and Hibakusha often faced discrimination and social stigma, feared by some as being somehow contagious or genetically tainted. This societal isolation compounded the personal trauma, forcing many survivors into silence about their experiences. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Yamaguchi demonstrated a remarkable resilience. He eventually returned to work, fathered 2 more children after the war, and outwardly built a life that appeared, to the casual observer, to be one of normalcy and quiet perseverance. He worked for the Allied occupation forces as a translator and then returned to Mitsubishi, burying his past deep inside in an effort to provide for his family and move forward. For decades, Yamaguchi maintained this public silence, bearing the weight of his unique history privately. It was not until much later in life, spurred by the declining health of his wife and the death of his son, that he felt a compulsion to speak out. He came to believe that his unimaginable double survival was not a random curse, but a profound responsibility. He began to share his story publicly, writing a memoir and giving interviews to ensure that the true human cost of nuclear weapons would not be forgotten. His gentle demeanor and unwavering message of peace transformed him into a powerful symbol. He became the public face of the Niju Hibakusha, and in 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized him as such, a bureaucratic confirmation of a truth he had carried for 64 years. In his final years, his voice, though often soft, carried the immense authority of his experience. He spoke not in abstract terms of megatons or geopolitics, but a fundamental assault on humanity. He once stated, "The reason that I hate the atomic bomb is because of what it does to human dignity." This simple, powerful sentence encapsulated his entire life's testimony. It was a condemnation of the weapon's power to strip people of their identity, their health, and their very humanity, reducing them to suffering shadows. His advocacy was no longer just about his own survival. It was a sacred duty to speak for the hundreds of thousands who could not. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's final years were a race against time, a deliberate and passionate campaign to sear his message into the world's conscience before his voice was silenced. He had transcended his own immense suffering to become a global emblem for peace, dedicating his remaining energy to a simple, unequivocal goal: the total abolition of nuclear weapons. He was not a politician or a general. He was a witness. His authority came from the unique and terrible truth of his experience, and he wielded it with a quiet, steadfast determination. He spoke to documentary filmmakers, attended peace gatherings, and pleaded with world leaders to understand that nuclear weapons were not instruments of power to be managed, but existential threats to be eliminated. His presence was a living bridge to a past that the world seemed dangerously willing to relegate to history books, a constant, human reminder of the concrete horror behind abstract concepts of deterrence and mutually assured destruction. His long and remarkable life, a testament to the resilience of the human body and spirit, finally came to a close on January 4th, 2010. He died in the city of Nagasaki at the age of 93. The cause of his death listed as stomach cancer. While it is impossible to state definitively, it is a fate that hangs with a heavy and likely connection to the intense radiation he absorbed on two separate occasions. His death was not the end of the story, but the moment his legacy fully crystallized. He passed away as the most famous Niji Hibakusha, but more importantly, as a husband, a father, and a grandfather whose family had endured their own share of suffering linked to those fateful days in 1945. He had outlived his wife and his first son, tragedies that added a profound layer of personal loss to his public narrative. The legacy of Tsutomu Yamaguchi is a complex and enduring one. He is remembered as a historical anomaly, the man who survived the unsurvivable twice. His life story is a stark illustration of the sheer, random chance that governs existence, a narrative of such incredible coincidence that it borders on the mythological. Yet, his true legacy lies in the purpose he forged from that coincidence. He chose not to be defined solely by his victimhood, but by his advocacy. He transformed his unparalleled trauma into a universal plea for reason and humanity. His story forces us to confront the full, grotesque reality of nuclear warfare not as a strategic equation, but as a human experience, one of blinding light, searing heat, lingering sickness, and incalculable loss. In a world where nuclear threats persist, his voice, even after his passing, remains one of the most powerful and authentic arguments for peace. He stands as a permanent warning, a man who looked into the heart of the nuclear fire not once, but twice, and emerged to tell a tale that we, as a global community, cannot afford to forget. The story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the most profound paradoxes of the 20th century, a narrative of horrific luck and miraculous survival, intertwined so completely they become inseparable. He was a man uniquely marked by history, forced to endure the absolute worst of human ingenuity not once, but twice. His life stands as a living testament to two opposing forces: the terrifying, civilization-ending power we have unleashed upon ourselves, and incredible, almost inexplicable resilience of the human spirit to endure, to rebuild, and to find meaning in the aftermath of utter devastation. His account is far more than a historical curiosity or a statistical anomaly. It is a permanent warning, etched in flesh and memory. He was the only person who could bear witness to the full, repeated horror of nuclear warfare, carrying the burden of two cities' agonies, so that the world might understand the true cost. His experience forces us to confront a difficult question. Was Tsutomu Yamaguchi the unluckiest man in history, chosen by fate to suffer through the unthinkable on two separate occasions? Or was he, in fact, the luckiest, having cheated death in its most absolute form not once, but twice, to live a long life and become a voice for peace? There is no simple answer, and his story lives in the tension between these two ideas. We want to hear what you think. After hearing his story, Do you see him as a symbol of ultimate misfortune or miraculous fortune? Share your perspective in the comments below. We're truly interested in this discussion. If this journey into history has moved you and you wish to learn more about the stories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we have curated other videos that explore this pivotal moment in human history. You can find them on the screen now. If you want to join us as we continue to uncover the most compelling and important stories from our past, please help support our channel by liking this video, subscribing for more content, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss a journey into history. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's final question remains with us, a challenge to our collective conscience and a plea for a more peaceful future.